A few days ago, one of the world's best-known radio talk show hosts, Piers, interviewed one of the world's best-known scientists, Richard Dawkins. Morgan had interviewed Dawkins before, and Dawkins talked about that interview to Andrew Gold. He told us he thinks Piers Morgan is a fool, and is not interested in what he believes.
There was a recent interview you did with Piers Morgan, and you sort of touched on it. I think it felt like you didn't really believe that he believed that there's this afterlife and God and things like that. And I
said that, yes.
Yeah. How do you think they don't deep down believe it?
I can't speak for them, but in the abstract, something made me think Piers Morgan didn't believe. I think Piers Morgan's a fool. So I'm not really much interested in what he believes, actually.
Morgan started by asking Dawkins about that interview with Gold.
Well, Mr. Dawkins joins me exclusively again now to do battle with the fool. Richard, I thoroughly enjoyed our last conversation. But why would you turn on me like that afterwards?
I did too. But it was nothing to do with anything you said. It was a question that you asked me that I thought you shouldn't have asked me.
Ah, okay. Okay, well, we can move forward in the spirit of mutual non-foolishness.
Let's move forward. I do not think you're a fool, no.
Dawkins specifically says he does not think Morgan is a fool. Now that reminds me of Sabina Hossenfelder's warning not to believe what scientists tell you.
But seriously, I've good reasons to mistrust science and scientists, and so do you.
Should we believe what he tells Gold? Should we believe what he tells Morgan? Or should we believe anything he says? But putting that aside for the moment, Morgan brings up an interview with Stephen Meyer, who points out that science needs to invoke a cause which is adequate to account for whatever needs to be explained.
Dawkins wants to portray theistic belief as if it's equivalent to belief in fairies, and he'll concede that, well, it's possible. But I think there's a stronger argument for the theistic case. And that is that when scientists and philosophers reason from evidence, they typically use a method of reasoning that has a technical name. It's called inferring to the best explanation, where the best explanation is one where you're invoking a cause which has the kind of powers that would be required to explain the phenomenon of interest. And you correctly pointed out in your conversation with him that when you get back to that, what physicists often call the singularity, the point where matter, space, time, and energy begin to exist, the materialist is really up against a huge conundrum, because prior to the origin of matter, there is no matter to do the causing. That's what we mean by the origin of matter, that's where it starts.
Right.
And so if you want to invoke a cause which is sufficient to explain the origin of matter, you can't invoke matter. It's in principle, the materialistic explanations are in principle insufficient. So you need to invoke something which is external to the material universe and is not bounded by time and space as well. And that starts to paint a picture of the kind of cause you would need that has the sort of attributes the traditional theists have traditionally associated with God.
Now, that sounds pretty reasonable to me. Probably the most popular explanation our brilliant scientists give us for the origin of the creation is that it suddenly came out of a wormhole in an event called the Big Bang. And what is a wormhole?
Another hypothesis suggests that these newly formed sections of space and time could be wormholes, which are essentially shortcuts or tunnels in the fabric of space and time. Wormholes are theoretical possibilities in Einstein's theory of general relativity, but no one has actually seen or proven their existence.
So, a wormhole is a theoretical possibility in Einstein's general theory of relativity. And remember, Einstein's theory has a mysterious and marvellous dimension of imaginary time multiplied by the speed of light. And although just about all physicists these days seem happy to swallow this story, we shouldn't forget what Frederick Soddy said about relativity. it has been made the occasion for an orgy of amateurish metaphysics, all tending to represent the mathematician, a mere calculator apart from experimental knowledge, into a heaven-sent magician, able to make length and time physically equivalent. And, of course, it's the imaginary time multiplied by the speed of light in the mathemagic which gives this mystical equivalence and its wonderful black holes, white holes, wormholes, and other such things. Nobody has ever seen any of those mathematical holes. You may have noticed one image being presented time after time as a photograph of a black hole. We saw in episode 84 that Robitaille has shown this image to be a fraud, and other scientists have failed to find it where the fraudsters claim to have photographed it. But scientists keep on showing it because it's the only evidence they have that black holes exist. It doesn't seem to matter that it's a fraud, and it also doesn't seem to matter that Robitaille has demonstrated why black holes can't happen. So, as for those wormholes, I wonder if anyone could seriously consider a wormhole to be an adequate cause for the origin of the entire creation.
Now, you see, Richard Dawkins, this is the nub of, I think, my whole issue with your position on this. And you can respond, obviously, to what you just heard in a moment. But when you go back to the very start, what is there before that? And that, I think I asked you last time, and Professor Meyer brought that up again as being the flaw in your position, which is what is there before it starts? What is nothing?
This is a question for a physicist, not a biologist, but what I would answer to Professor Meyer is that we need to explain complexity in terms of simplicity. And of course it's true that I cannot say what was there before the Big Bang. Physicists sometimes tell us that the word before doesn't even mean anything before the Big Bang. But whatever it was, it
but it has to, doesn't it?
You cannot suddenly invoke...
Doesn't it have to? Someone as logical as you are, and I believe you are, you think about this all very logically. A logical mind surely has to appreciate that before the Big Bang, there has to have been something before then. Otherwise, what is nothing?
A physicist will tell you that
what do you tell me?
I'm trying to tell you what a physicist would say first of all. They would say that you cannot use the word before for the Big Bang. Time began at the Big Bang. There was no before the Big Bang. I know it's contrary to common sense. Physicists don't necessarily deal with common sense.
Well, it makes no sense, does it? And that's what I mean. I think you're a logical man. That cannot make sense to you. The idea that you're not even allowed to use the word before the Big Bang, when every part of both of our brains tells us that that's obviously nonsensical, doesn't that make you think again?
We are not physicists. I, like you, am completely baffled by what physicists say to me, which is that you cannot use the word before for before the Big Bang. Time itself began at the Big Bang. Now that is totally counterintuitive. It's counterintuitive to me. It's counterintuitive to you. It's counterintuitive to Stephen Meyer. But we are not physicists. And you need to talk to a physicist. Talk to a physicist about that. And they will tell you that you cannot use the word before for the Big Bang.
Yeah, but you think that's as preposterous as I do.
I do because I'm not a physicist.
What an extraordinary situation. Here we have a world-acclaimed scientist saying he can't understand what physicists say about their theories. Einstein said that any scientist who can't explain his work to a school child is a charlatan. He was talking about a time before the establishment had completely taken over science. And as Brian G. Wallace pointed out in The Farce of Physics, the major tactic used to create this artificial separation between those they consider professionals and those they consider amateurs has been the elaborate use of technical jargon and complex mathematics. Herbert Dingle pointed out, scientists have relapsed into imagining how nature ought to behave and then assuming that she does so. The factor which has made this possible is the exchange of reason for mathematics. Mathematics has become the master in science instead of the servant. Even Einstein said, "Since the mathematicians have invaded the theory of relativity, I do not understand it myself anymore." And as we saw in episode 105, Sabine Hossenfelder tells us,
most of what physicists do in the foundations of physics today is pseudoscience. It's paper production with no scientific merit that teaches us nothing about nature. It's mathematical fiction.
Physics has turned into mathematical fiction.
You've just written a book as a biologist called The Genetic Book of the Dead, in which you talk about the body and the genome, comprehensive dossiers and so on. So you're prepared to expound a philosophy based on that as a biologist. But why would you then think that a physicist cannot be contradicted just simply because they're a physicist? I could contradict what you say as a biologist.
No, you really aren't getting it. I'm so sorry. Modern physics is exceedingly mysterious. It really is. I mean, have you tried to read some of the difficult modern physics books? It really is very difficult to understand.
So it's not really surprising that Dawkins hasn't a clue what the physicists are talking about. He simply doesn't understand the language of mathematical fiction. He assumes that because he can't understand their mumbo-jumbo, they must be far more clever than he is. It's just too mysterious for normal people to understand. Well, yes, we know about that. Fritjof Capra told us about it in episode 102. We shall often encounter statements where it is almost impossible to say whether they have been made by physicists or Eastern mystics. And remember how Angelica gave some clarification. Reality is not temporal linear. It is holistic. Every moment of universal existence exists here, now, simultaneously. No beginnings, no ends, no middle, no time, no motion for time to explain. Yes, reality is quite non-intuitive, quite a mystic's path. Dawkins goes on with his own evolutionary mysticism, telling us all about human intuition evolving on the plains of Africa.
Have you tried to read some of the difficult modern physics books? It really is very difficult to understand. And intuition doesn't do it. You cannot use human intuition. Human intuition was built up by evolution over many millions of years to survive on the African plain, hunting and gathering, looking for waterholes, looking for mates and so on. Our brains were not built to understand the profundities of the origin of the universe, the end of the universe, the kind of things that physicists deal with.
And this explains why our poor understanding is not up to dealing with physics. And his fiction has exactly as much evidence as the physicists have for their fiction. Precisely none whatsoever.
I think it's actually amazing that at least some human brains are capable of dealing with this kind of stuff. My brain isn't, and nor is yours.
That's my point, though.
I wish it were.
Well, yeah, I wish both our brains could. But the truth is, it's because the human brain can't comprehend this, including, I don't think, any physicist. Because the moment they say you can't have before the Big Bang, they lose me completely just on a common sense perspective. It's that reason that I think there has to be a power that is greater than the human brain.
There has to be something more difficult to understand than the human brain can understand. I accept that. But it doesn't have to be God. It doesn't have to be the kind of God who, I don't know, forgives sins and listens to prayers and things like that. There is something very mysterious, and I don't understand it, and you don't understand it, and maybe we never will. I think it's not clear whether physicists understand it. Some do, some don't, but it's obviously going to be very mysterious. But God is not that interesting mystery. God is just a supernatural sky daddy.
Dawkins is utterly confident that although he has no answer to the question of the origin of the creation, it is absolutely certain that it could not be due to a creator. He doesn't even try to consider the possibility. He puts forward a sky daddy from his own feeble imagination, a concept which deserves the contempt he pours on it. But he seems to be utterly unable to bring himself to think as any scientist should be able to think. Fred Hoyle spent most of his life as a high-profile atheist. When he considered the problem seriously, he wrote, "Once we see, however, that the probability of life originating at random is so utterly minuscule as to make it absurd, it becomes sensible to think that the favourable properties of physics on which life depends are in every respect deliberate. It is therefore almost inevitable that our own measure of intelligence must reflect high intelligence, even to the limit of God." Dawkins has considered the probabilities Hoyle considered, as we saw in episodes 17 to 20. He even admits those probabilities are ludicrously minuscule, but he can't bring himself to accept the truth, which was so obvious to Hoyle. Could that be because he's made more than $10 million from his books scoffing at God? Or could it be because of his putting adverts on the sides of London buses scoffing at God? Might that make such an admission just too embarrassing? Or could it be that he is as foolish as he told Andrew Gold Piers Morgan is? But actually, I find it astounding that he could make statements like this just a few days ago. Remember episode 59, my birthday upload 2 years ago, and its sequel, episode 84, my 80th birthday edition, just over 1 year ago.
We have been told that the Big Bang was the beginning of the universe, and none of us ever questioned the Big Bang theory. However, it fails to answer many fundamental questions. For instance, what existed before the Big Bang? If the Big Bang happened because of nothingness, who or what created nothingness? Furthermore, the Big Bang theory suggests that the universe is expanding in all directions, but it doesn't explain what the universe is expanding into. What lies on the edge of the universe? Have you ever considered the possibility that the Big Bang wasn't the beginning? The renowned British physicist Roger Penrose recently announced a proof that the Big Bang wasn't the beginning of the universe. The James Webb Telescope stands as humanity's grandest and mightiest space instrument ever deployed, yet no one was expecting it would pose a challenge to the Big Bang theory. The telescope's recent observations are compelling astronomers to reconsider their understanding of the universe's origin. Renowned physicist Roger Penrose didn't hold back in describing the astonishing discoveries made by the JWST. The problem lies in the fact that the James Webb Space Telescope is disrupting the current understanding. Suddenly, we realize that we may need to revise all the textbooks that explain the beginning of the universe.
I hadn't realized there could still be supposedly well-informed scientists like Dawkins who still think that ludicrous Big Bang theory is now anything but a bad joke. But it's interesting to remember what Dawkins said about the evolution of our mental abilities. They evolved on the African plains, so they never got as far as the reasoning power of a physicist, or scientists like himself for that matter. But somehow that primitive evolution process did arrive at the reasoning power of Piers Morgan and Stephen Meyer and, as we saw, of Fred Hoyle. Well, since the physicist's favourite story has collapsed, it does rather look as if it's Dawkins and the physicist he holds in awe that might be the ones somewhat lacking in enlightenment. The way of a fool is right in his own eyes, but he that hearkeneth unto counsel is wise. The tongue of the wise useth knowledge aright, but the mouth of fools poureth out foolishness. The lips of the wise disperse knowledge, but the heart of the foolish doth not so. Thank you for joining me for this episode. If you enjoyed it, please like, subscribe and press the bell so that you'll be notified as I release new movies. If you'd like to support this project, you're welcome to do so through Patreon. Find a link on my channel banner and in the description below.